Something else that's useful to know is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel or do all the homework yourself. You have allies in the legislature. If you're supporting a bill, we'll obviously communicate with the sponsor's office, and they can keep you apprised of a lot of things. What's the committee hearing schedule? What witnesses are signed up? What kind of bases would be helpful for you to touch? So get an ally in the legislature. If you're opposing a bill as opposed to supporting it, you can still find allies. You know that there are legislators that agree with you on the issue. Contact their office and say, I'd like to help in the opposition to the bill to put Coke in school drinking fountains. And root beer, I mean. In school drinking fountains. And you will have someone on the inside who, again, will keep you up to date on the committee, who should ideally keep you up to date on the committee schedule and can help touch base and steer you in the right direction. I will also point out that, go back in your mind to the path how a bill becomes a law. There are a lot of opportunities. It's easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill. Because for a bill to pass, it has to be approved in the first committee. It has to make it to the floor of the House or of the Senate. If it has a price tag, then it has to go to the Appropriations Committee and survive that process where the dollar tenders decide whether or not to appropriate the money necessary to implement the bill so it can live or die in the Appropriations Committee. Then it goes to the floor of the chamber that it got introduced in. Then it has to run the same gauntlet again in the next chamber. If it was amended, it goes to a conference committee. And so every single one of those steps along the way, including preliminary passage in the chamber and final passage in the chamber, is all an opportunity to kill a bill. You have to survive all of them to pass it. You only have to kill it once. There are some exceptions, but in general, at any one of those steps, you kill a bill and it's killed. To pass a bill, you have to push it all the way through that entire process. So, again, depending on whether you're supporting a bill or opposing a bill, you have an easier job or a harder job. There's probably more I could say, but I've probably taken longer than my allotted time, and I'll look forward to hearing some of Joe's perspectives, and then we'll develop further with Q&A from David and from all of you. But
that's right. Yeah, we'll have try to do the last 30 minutes for questions from y'all, so think of them and be ready for those. Joe, what about the perspective from the House side and from how you see things?
Dave, thanks again for being here, and I just want to thank all of you. Forgive me for being less than energetic today. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I wanted to honor my commitment to be here. I first wanted to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and let you know that as legislators, it's truly an honor to serve with distinction, because it's one of the most humbling, challenging jobs I've ever had in my life. I've worked in business, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, I've worked in government, and to get up every day and to solve problems and to listen to diverse viewpoints and to try to be a good listener as well as reach a goal. It's extremely challenging, especially when you have 100 different legislators from very different perspectives. I did want to mention my other job is I work for a nonprofit organization in Centennial called Project Cure. We're the largest nonprofit organization in the world that we take excess medical supplies from hospitals in the United States and we send them to hospitals in 123 developing countries. And I got my first chance to go to Guatemala, first chance to Latin America last week. And I'll never forget, when I flew back in, my connection was to Houston, and the sign said, welcome back to the United States of America, citizens of this land. I kind of turned up a little bit, and I was pretty proud, because I hadn't been out of the country in a while, and it made me realize I not only love my country, but a lot of people do, and I know Shawn loves it as much as I do. And one of the cool things about this job is you come across a lot of people who are very passionate about their issue, or a set of issues, and the trick of this job, I think, is to really try to find the best solution for the common good for the state of Colorado. And that's what gets me up every day. And I'm looking forward to the session beginning January 12th. What I've found is to be the most practical way people can influence the process are the following. I love getting a thoughtful email from a constituent who lists their name, their address, and their phone number so I can call them up. I get over 100 emails a day during the session, and I respond to all of them. Some of them are form letters, and you know those pretty well. But the one that's articulate and says, here's who I am, here's my viewpoint, I read those, and they do influence me. And it can be very powerful. The second thing is, I love it when my constituents come down and knock on my door at the office. I'm in room 314, I just had to move upstairs. I'll sit, we'll get a cup of coffee, and I can't tell you that. Usually almost every day of the week, I've got an 8 a.m. coffee scheduled at a coffee shop in my district because someone calls me up and says, I need to chat about this issue. It's how I get bill ideas. It's how I learn about an issue. I'll give you an example, and this is why I love my job. I got a call from a woman who says, I'm going to lose my home. And sure enough, I researched the issue. We passed a bill a couple years ago for PERA, P-E-R-A, which is the state retirement system. But what happened was we left out about 100 people who were part-time Denver public school teachers, or they were part-time or assistants. And she was one of them. And the bill actually penalized her and about 100 other Denver residents from working more than about, I think it was 200, was it more than 100 days in a year. And beginning on the 101st day, their pension actually got reduced. And sure enough, I sponsored a bill real quickly. I got bipartisan support. It passed like 65-0 in the House. I forget the exact number in the Senate, it was similar, and the governor signed it. And she was able to keep her job, and she had a contract to work, 200-day a year, and as well as keep her home. And that pleased me. I mean, that's when government worked on behalf of the people. And I never would have known that if I would have just not have taken the time to take her call, schedule that coffee, and then research the issue. But that was very pleasing. And I think the third issue, too, is I do believe in joining a group and becoming organized, because there's just strength in numbers. Whether it's the 912 group or the Tea Party group or a group that's on criminal justice reform, on prison reform issues, when you have a different group that comes down and say, hey, we represent X amount of people, that can make a difference as well. I think the last thing I'll mention is relationships. I got a few constituents that call me a lot from both sides of the aisle, and they'll email me at all times of the day or night from both sides of the aisle, and we've got a relationship. And that does influence legislature, because they're willing to take the time to say, this is important to me. In the end, what I've learned is, you've got to be a good listener. Woodrow Wilson said, it takes a special person to be a good listener. Because, we're dealing with 600 bills and issues in 4 months. It's a rapid pace during those 4 months from January 12 to May 12 when we're in session. And it's kind of cool. It's a part-time citizen legislature. There's dozens of professions that are represented. And you've really got to understand all the issues. And I don't care how smart you are, you can't know every issue 40 bullet points deep. You've got to rely on people. And if you have an expertise, whether it's about PERA, whether it's about water easement issues, there's some complex issues we deal with, I'm going to turn to you. And especially if you're a constituent, I'll turn to you that much more. It's a brief summary. I look forward to your questions, but again, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Shawn. Now, both of you guys have referenced the number of legislators we have in Colorado. There's 65 representatives, 35 senators for 100. Each can introduce 5 bills, with certain exceptions. You can do more than that. Joe, I'll start with you and work back this way. What is the process of, how do you come up with your 5 topics? Who actually writes the bill? And what are the circumstances under which you can do more than 5? And some people don't understand that Denver is not like DC, where you've got a whole bunch of people working under staff. Describe what kind of staff you do have over in Denver and how much help you get from them.
Sure, Dave. As I mentioned a second ago, I get a lot of my bill ideas from constituents. The actual people that write the bills, there's about 50 lawyers that work at the state capitol. They're not my staffers, they're not Senator Mitchell's staffers. They work for all 100 state legislators. And it's like having a law firm there. They're incredibly hardworking, nonpartisan staff. And the difference, I think, from our state to DC as well as a lot of other states is that if you go to other states like Connecticut, who, if you are a state representative or a state senator and you want a bill idea introduced, it's not necessarily going to get assigned to a committee hearing. We're pretty fair in terms of what I call the sunshine laws, that we each get 5 bills, whether you're in the minority or the majority, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, or whether you're a state senator or a state representative, you get 5 bills. Where in Connecticut, if you're in the minority party and you don't have control of that committee, you could think about introducing a bill, but they're not going to send it to a committee. So I think as citizens, even if that bill maybe has a poor chance of not going through that first step of passing the committee, you have a chance to have your day in the sunshine. And that's, to me, what democracy in part is all about. I'll give you a great example. Last year, I passed a bill on trying to streamline the healthcare billing and reimbursement process. From one of my constituents who's pretty active. I joke sometimes it takes a PhD to understand that process. And I'll give you an example. Do you know there are over 800,000 what's called CPT codes? There's a code for a broken knee, there's a code for, some of you may know this better than I, working in the healthcare profession. Well, what's interesting is that when the HIPAA law passed Congress in 1996, they recommended that all 50 states streamline these codes, because what happens is, let's say Shawn's skiing in Vail and breaks his knee, I'm skiing in Vail and I break my knee, but he has Blue Cross and I have Aetna. We both go to St. Joe's Hospital. The way the CPT codes are put on the healthcare form are different. And that may seem really innocuous or small, but what that does is it creates so much delay and duplication in the billing and reimbursement process that the American Hospital Association says we waste $14 billion a year on that. Doctors get paid 90 days later. Small business owners have to spend 2 hours on the phone processing the claim on behalf of their employee. You know, the economic productivity goes down. So I worked 1.5 years on this bill with the hospitals, the doctors, the nurses, the insurance companies, and I passed that bill. And that came from a guy named Barry Keene, he's an engineer. He's actually an engineer, Republican, small business owner from Longmont, but he's gotten involved in the healthcare issue. So here's a guy who took an issue by the throat, researched it, came to me and says, "Hey, Representative Miklosi, have you thought about this? We're wasting a ton of money." I said, that seems crazy. And I started to ask other stakeholders, other experts. And they're like, "You're right." And we passed it. And in about 1.5 years, it takes that long to organize these codes. We think we're going to save $100 million in Colorado in the next 5 years alone. And that money can be poured back into healthcare. So, I mean, again, that's the constituent. But again, you've got to have folks on this side who are good listeners, and you've got to have folks on your side who are constituents who are willing to step up to the plate too and say, "Here's an idea."
So, Rich, how do you decide your 5 bills? What's the process there? And there's deadlines as to when you've got to introduce those. And what circumstances are you allowed to do more than 5?
Actually, I think the question of how a legislator chooses his or her bills has some important ideas built into the question. Going back to the considerations for your involvement, you may be interested in going down to the legislature because there's already a bill in the pipeline that you know you want to support or you want to oppose. But it may be that your interest is even preliminary or broader than that. It's not that there's some bill, you have an idea and you think there should be a bill. And as Joe says, we get a lot of ideas from constituents, from hearing from either organized interest groups or just residents in or out of our district. And there is a schedule. We have deadlines. We had to turn in our first 3 bills. Those that weren't just recently elected that are returning to the legislature had to turn in our first 3 bill requests by December 1st. And most legislators are kind of working on their ideas in the summer and fall leading up to their bill requests. So there is no formal process. I can't tell you that there's like a survivor vote on and off the island, and these are the 3 ideas that I have left at the end of the process. That's what I turn in. What I can tell you is if there's something that matters to you, ideally you're contacting your legislator or a legislator who is likely to agree with you on the issue in the summer to do some of the groundwork and prepare, or by fall anyway, so that they can be thinking about it and working with you and refining ideas to make sure that's one of the first 3 or final 2 requests they make. For the record, and not that it matters that much, December 1st is the deadline for our first 3 requests, and then a week or 2 into the session, sometime in mid-January, is the deadline for our second 2 requests. But again, from the perspective of citizens who are wanting to influence what goes on in government, your calendar or timeline for supporting or opposing legislation is when it starts appearing on the legislature's docket in January. And let me mention a very valuable resource, the legislature's website. I can't tell you how much information, and I believe reasonably user-friendly information, some of you may agree or disagree, I'll be interested in hearing, is available on that website. You can do word searches and topic searches and figure out what kinds of proposals there are in areas that you care about. Again, if it's responding to legislation, then January is when the game starts. But if it's an idea that you want to pursue or push, ideally the summer before that legislative session, and I doubt there is any set process. David asks, when do you get more than 5? The cheeky answer is the majority party gets more than 5 whenever they want, and the minority party very seldom gets more than 5. But you have to get permission from 2 out of 3 legislative leaders in the chamber, the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the House, and the House Minority Leader. 2 of those 3 have to approve the request, but as a matter of policy and practice, neither the Speaker nor the Majority Leader would join with the Minority Leader to approve a bill against the wishes of their own party colleague in leadership. There are very rare exceptions, but typically you have to get the support of the 2 leaders in the majority in the House or in the Senate to get an extra bill.